Okay, so the first way we're going to solve our quadratics is, so the square root property. So I just want you to look at this. If this has squared, okay, I'm going to write a simpler one here over to the side. All right, so let's say I have 100 equals x squared. Okay, there's one kind of like this on your homework. If you want to solve for x, all right, does anyone know what is the opposite of squared? Does anyone know that? Opposite of squared is the square root, okay? So we can kind of undo that, like usually equations we undo by doing the opposite, right? So I can undo that by taking the square root of both sides, okay? So we did that square rooting a while back. What's the square root of 100 then? That means what number times itself equals 100? 10, okay? Now what does it do on the side with the squared though? If it has x squared and I take the square root, that cancels out the squared. So whatever's in parentheses, you're just left with like all that was there. Just takes away the squared. So x would equal 10. All right, now let's try it with this one a little bit tougher. So it has that squared. So I do the square root on both sides. Okay. So which side has the squared, the left or the right? Left. So on the left, all that does is cancel out the squared and leaves you with y plus 5. Okay? Here's the part that's a little tricky. Mostly it's just hard to remember. A square root technically has two answers. It has a negative and a positive, okay? So for example, like the square root of 100, so on that one I was doing, and I hadn't shown you this yet, we said 10, right? Because 10 times 10 equals 100. Well, what about negative 10 times negative 10? Would that equal 100? Yes, because they would cancel out. So we will actually write this as the square root of 100 is plus or minus 10, because it could be either, okay? So let's see how that looks here. So the square root of 21 is a decimal, okay? So on your calculator, do the square root. So grab your calculator, you have to click the second button, and then x2. It should give you this, and you'll do 21. Enter. So 4.58, let's go with nearest tenth, so 4.6. Okay. All right, so here's how we do this. We have to split this. If it could be plus or minus 4.6, I'm going to write this two ways to finish it off, okay? I always kind of like do these two lines like this because I'm going to have two equations. I'm going to have y plus 5 equals positive 4.6, right? But what is my other? Y plus 5 equals, it could be positive or it could be negative 4.6. So those are going to give you a different answer. All right, so now we just solve. Now's the easy part. If I have y plus 6 equals 4.6, how would I solve for y? What do I do with the 5? How do I move it away? Subtract it. Okay, and then you can type in your calculator. 4.6 minus 5. It'll give us negative what, Libby? Mm-hmm. Now the other side will be different. So Haley, you do this one. I'm still going to minus 5 because that's plus 5, right? To cancel that out, make it be 0. But on this side, I'm going to do negative 4.6 minus 5. What does that give you? Good. So do you remember on the graph where it would hit once, twice, or none on the x-axis, and those were your solutions? Well, if this one comes out to 2 answers, that means this would be a graph that hits twice. So you can have, okay, so we have 2 answers. That's okay. All right. Now let's look at, so you guys will try this one. Well, I'll help you actually. I'll do the first one with you and then I'll have you do the second, okay? So x minus 2 squared equals 16. So first thing you do, square root both sides. So Tori, what's that do on the left side? What's that square root do to my squared? So I'm left with what? No squared, right? That cancels it out. Now this side, what's the square root of 16? 4. Now remember what was the tricky part? Not just 4, right? Plus or minus 4. All right, so let's split it into 2. So Maya, what would my first equation be? So do like, so the x minus 2, you don't have to have the parentheses, x minus 2 equals plus 4. And then, right. So take a little mental note there. The x minus 2 part doesn't change signs. It's just the part that you square root of that whole number, okay? All right, and then we solve. Lane, how would we solve this left equation?
Minus the 2.
Not minus the
Plus
2,
the 2.
plus the 2, okay. So then that would give us x equals what?
6.
Okay, and Libby on this side, x minus 2 equals negative 4. How would we move the 2 over? And then this will be a little different because it's negative 4 plus 2. You owe someone $4. You pay back 2 of that. How much do you owe them now?
2.
Right, but you still owe, so it's still a negative. Okay, so that one has 2 answers. So you see how it says select all? That's when you have your 2 answers, okay? So I would say 6 and negative 2. Please be careful about your signs. They like to put those opposite ones on there in case you forget to bring down a sign, okay? All right, I want you guys to take like 2 minutes here and try this one. So y plus 18 squared equals 77. So y'all should have got, they did the nearest hundredth instead, but that's okay. We got negative 9.2. And the little squiggly equals means about, because you guys had to round, okay? And then the other was negative 26.8, so that was this one. Okay? Okay, so example 2 here will be like, well, actually, I'll come back and tell you. It's like one of them on your homework, but it's also one that's on your test, okay? It looks way harder than it is, all right? It just gives some weird variables. So it says, during the egg drop competition for an eco school, students must create a container for an egg that prevents the egg from breaking when dropped from a height of 30 feet. The formula, so here's where it looks complicated, can be used to approximate the number of seconds, t, so our t is right here, it takes for the container to reach a height h from an initial height of h0. Okay, so that's just saying like 0 like the beginning where it starts. That is not an exponent, okay? That's what looks confusing. So find the time it takes the container to reach the ground. Okay, so at ground level, what elevation is ground level? Has it went up or down if it's at the ground? No, so they plugged in a 0 for h, okay? Now the HO, or H0, it says is the initial height. So look at the question. What height did they drop it from? 30. So they just plugged 30 in for that and 0 in for h, okay? All right, now you just solve like you did. Okay, so let's do, I'm going to do mine over here so I have a little bit more room. So if you want to do that, so we have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 30. Okay, so just like we were solving mega, what would we do first? How can I move the 30 away from the variable? Let's up minus it. And if I minus it from 0,
Oh, you gotta go the other way.
I'm going to kind of go in the other way here because my variable's on the right instead of the left. Okay. So we're not going to take the square root until the end on this one because I want to wait and see if I can get that t by itself. So now, how could I move the negative 16 to the other side? Think like, if it were just like this, what would you do to get t by itself? No?
Wait, would you
They're
divide
stuck together. Yes, Tori, you would divide. So I'm going to divide. That comes to a decimal, I believe. So I'm dividing by, or no, it is a decimal, but I need the whole thing. So take negative 30 and divide it by negative 16 for me. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and write the whole thing right now since it did stop. It wasn't repeating. Okay, that leaves me with t squared. So then what was the opposite of squared? What did we do? Square root. So I'm going to square root the whole thing, which cancels my squared, gives me t equals, and then square root that. So we'll type that in. What's the square root of 1.875? You get it, Haley? So Haley got we're going to say 1.4 because it was 3/6. Okay. That one is done, but I want you to think for just a second. Usually we put plus or minus. T is talking about seconds. So why can negative not be an option? Exactly. You can't have negative time. So I would just say 1.4 is about 1.4 seconds. Okay. All right, and flip the page, or actually look at this real quick, sorry. All right, our last method for today is solving by factoring. Factoring is what you did last unit, okay? So you're still doing that. So like where you do the x and stuff, that's what we're doing. So we're going to give a quick refresher when we get to that. So look at example 3. Okay, so example 3 is one where they just have two parts. So we have 4x squared and 12x. So Tori, what number goes into 4 and 12? 4. Do they also share a variable?
Yeah.
Yes, they both have an x, right? So I can take out 4x. I want to write mine over here. So I divide by 4x. Remember when we did greatest common factor, it goes outside your parentheses. Put your answer inside. So Haley, if I have 4x squared divided by 4x, what would happen to the 4's? They will cancel. Now what about the x's? If I have x squared divided by x, what am I left with? That's like a 1, and I subtract them. So that leaves me with x to the first, or you can just x. So you think you can take one of the x's out of the 2. All right, Maya, what will this second part be? Negative 12x divided by 4x. Negative 3. What happens to the x's, though? They go away. Okay, equals 0. So this should look just like your homework, like that one I went over with you. So they had already factored. So remember the ones with the 2 parentheses we looked at? So how do I split this? Libby, what would my first equation be? Split it into 2. Take the first part. 4x equals what? What's the right side say? 0. Okay, now you try the other one.
4.
No, take the middle, the parentheses. So we split it into its 2 factors. Like 4x was one of our. I take this part, set it equal to 0. Take this part, set it equal to 0. Okay, so my other one is x minus 3 equals 0. So see how that just splits it into two parts. We solve both.
I didn't test.
Hey, Tori, how do I solve the one on the left? This is 4 times x.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I do?
Times it.
Opposite of times is divide.
Oh,
So what's 0 divided by 4?
0.
0. Okay, so that's one answer. And, Libby, what would I do on the x minus 3 equals 0 to solve?
Add.
And 0 plus 3 gives you x equals what? 3. Okay, and I believe this is the last one. Let me check real quick. Okay, last one here. So solve a quadratic equation by factoring a trinomial. So this is like what kind of our standard factoring looked like last time where we had the 3, okay? Except now they threw that equals 0 on there. That's just when you can actually solve it. So we're going to factor it. So I'm going to do that over here. So write this with me. If there were 3, remember we set up the x. You label A, B, C. Okay, remember 1 can be there. All right, so on the top, I want A times C.
Are we doing the x one?
So 1 times negative 8 gives us negative 8, right? Now the bottom, so I need two numbers that multiply to get negative 8. What do they need to add to? What's the B?
2x.
Negative 2. Don't need the x though, okay? All right, so think for a sec. What two numbers multiply to get negative 8 and add to negative 2? Any thoughts?
Alright, so 4 times 2.
Okay, 4 and 2.
Yeah.
For them to add to negative 2, which one would have to be negative? Which one? The 4. And would a negative and a positive would multiply to get a negative, right? So that's good. Okay, so then we write that. I'll write mine under here. So do you remember doing the double parentheses? But now it equals 0. So x minus 4 is my first one. What would my second one be? X plus 2. Good. Okay, now just split it into your 2. Libby, you watching? Okay, so split into 2. X minus 4 equals what? 0. What's the other one going to be?
X plus 2.
Perfect. All right, now solve. Haley, what would we do to solve the left one? This is minus 4. What's the opposite? So plus. So x equals 0 plus 4 is 4. Tori, how do we solve the right side?
So you minus 2,
Good.
right? And then 2. 0, 0,
0 minus 2.
Negative 2.
Negative 2. Good.
Hey, punch out final.
All right, so circle if you already have these. 2, Libby.
Big old.
Okay, here's your numbers on that page 637, right? All right, we did not have one like this in the notes, so I wanted to show you an example. On 10, the issue is, you see how that 18's on the other side and it's not 0? To solve, the right side has to be 0. So how would I move that 18 over to the left? Plus. So let's just make that a squared plus 11a plus 18 equals 0. Okay, now you do your x. So the top number, a times c, would give us 18. What do they need to add to? What's the b? What do they need to add to? What's your, no, like your b. So a, b, c. 11. Okay, two numbers that multiply to get 18, but add to 11. What do you think? positive, so try 2. Start with 2. What's 18 divided by 2?
I don't even know.
9, okay. Kid, do 9 and 2 add to 11? Yes, so those are your two numbers, so split your parentheses. So, Libby, what would the first parenthesis be? A what? A plus 2. Maya, what would the second one be? A plus 9. Okay, and then split it into your two equations. So I'd have a plus 2 equals 0, and a plus 9 equals 0. So the harder part on these ones is the factoring part, okay, like the doing the x and finding those. So then you just solve and have two numbers. You'll also have to move the numbers around on 14. Okay, so I'll rewrite 14 for you. It would be h squared minus 16h plus 48 equals 0.
Oh, wait, did we finish?
Skipping a lot of pages.